Hey everyone, I hope you all having a great day. With that said, I have some more interesting stories for you all to listen to. I hope you all enjoy. Thank you. I just read another user's story about the smiling man at the laundromat, and it instantly transported me back to a similar high school memory. I was about 15 or 16, and my older brother that went to the same high school as me would drive us to school most days of the week, when our parents stopped wanting to get up early, since we both had zero period. That began at 7 a.m. One day, on the way to school, we stopped at a donut shop that was in sort of a remote part of town on a stretch of highway. It was still kind of dark outside before 6:30 a.m., and this was in the late 90s or early 2000s before it was common teenagers had their own cell phones. So I didn't have a way to call or text. This shop had nothing around it except trees and a stretch of empty land. The parking lot was too big for how small this place was. He didn't park us in the very front spot by the door. To this day, I have no idea why he didn't. He parked about a row and a half from the front and walked in. No one was at the counter, so I watched him wait for service. While he was waiting, my eyes wandered and panned suddenly to a man's face, staring daggers at me, from one of the tables in the shop. It was very startling, like in the movies when they look through binoculars and see someone staring at them through the scope. I immediately looked away and down because it freaked me out. At first I thought maybe the man was tired and was just kind of spacing out because of how early it was. But I still felt his eyes on me after a few minutes, and although I fought myself to look up, I glanced up and he had a creepy smile on his face. He had short bobbed hair like a dude would have in the 70s. I looked at my brother, and it felt like an eternity as he picked the donuts. He had turned around once, and I tried to get his attention, but he turned back around to keep choosing. When my brother was talking to the cashier, I noticed the man at the table get up. He never took his eyes off me, and I remember my heart beating hard in my chest as I looked down, since I couldn't think of anything else to do. This is how I was reminded of this memory from the other post. The feeling of helplessness when someone is staring and making you uncomfortable. I hoped he would just walk away, but out of the corner of my eye, I noticed he was approaching the truck. My first thought was to reach over and honk the horn as loud as I could, but he was already about one stride away from the driver's side, and I had then noticed the door hadn't auto-locked. It was the kind that this little pop-up button lock. I only had seconds to choose the locked door or honk the horn, so I practically leapt over, and I remember slapping down the lock button. Not but 2 or 3 seconds later, the man pulled on the door handle. He turned to walk away, but then turned again and tried to pull harder. I then honked the horn to get attention, but I saw my brother had walked to the other side of the counter out of the view. After I honked a second time, the guy walked off past the car, across the street. It was a bit wooded before the highway resumed. When my brother came in, he asked why I was honking and being impatient, because it was still early, and we wouldn't be late. After I told him some creep tried to get in, he drove around the area, but no one was around since it had been like 5 more minutes before he got to the car. Creepy, smiley, zoned out donut shop guy, let's not meet again. I am aware that this title sounds like a horror movie or a creepypasta, and if I hadn't lived it, I would have thought it was. This was one of my many stories that I have from working night shifts at a laundromat in a bad area, and it's definitely the freakiest. So for context, my mom took a job years ago at a local laundromat because we knew the owner and needed extra money. I was around 10 when she got the job, and she allowed me to come with her, because she would give me a little allowance for helping her do small tasks. I ended up going with her every night for years, and as I got older, I mainly went to make sure my mom was safe, because I was worried about her. We regularly dealt with angry customers refusing to leave, most of which were drunk or high, and we had to call the police a few times. My mom was already worried about me tagging along, but I insisted, and to this day, I still can't say I regret it. A lot of good came out of it, mainly the work experience, and that made up for how intense it could be. I have a lot of interesting stories from that time, but this one took the cake for the most horrifying, and it took place when I was about 12. Being the young and dumb kid that I was, I designated myself the job of chasing people off when it was closing time. We'd have people parking behind the building pretty regularly, so I would walk to the side of the building and start yelling that they were now trespassing, and I called the cops if they didn't leave. I feel that this is important to bring up, because I now realize that I let any shady person hanging around the building at night know of my presence. And that's a dangerous thing to do when you're a 12-year-old girl. I was blissfully unaware that anything could happen to me, until one night when we showed up to find that door lock had been broken. My mom unlocked the building that morning, so it wasn't like this was a break-in attempt, since it had been unlocked all day. We were a bit shaken up by my mom, texted her boss to let him know about it, and just told me to tell her if I saw anyone pull up. So after about 30 minutes, I finished my few tasks and sat down to draw in my sketchbook. I had barely been sat down for a few minutes when I heard the door swing open, which startled me because normally people just knock when they see the very obvious closed sign. My mom noticed it too, and yelled that we were closed. I heard an older man's voice respond, explaining that he had just come in to use our drink machine. We normally let people in to use their snack and drink machines, so my mom told him he had a few minutes and went back into the closet to grab something. I was sat about 7 feet away from the drink machine, so I heard him walk up, but didn't really pay much attention to him. I continued to draw until I started getting the feeling that someone was watching me, and I realized I didn't hear this guy put any money in the drink machine. I nervously glanced to my left and saw a tall man in his mid-60s staring right at me with a big smile on his face. I jumped a little, but forced an awkward smile back at him and directed my attention back to the drawing. As soon as I did this, I heard what sounded like shuffling, and when I looked over again and he was closer, I didn't know what to do, so I tried to just not look at him, but every time I would look away, he would shuffle closer. His body was still facing the drink machine, but his neck was craned in my direction, and he wouldn't stop smiling and staring. I began shaking and panicking, and my eyes were darting back and forth between him and the closet door, while I tried to plan a fast escape. I went to reach for my knife in my bag, because I couldn't even imagine this man's intentions, and quickly realized that it was not there. I had left my knife at home when I needed it the most, and I was petrified. I decided to just stare back at him, despite being terrified and trembling violently. And after what felt like eternity, he suddenly broke eye contact and yelled to my mom to have a good night before turning around and walking out. The relief hit me instantly, and I tried to calm myself down after what had just happened. I thought I was finally safe and started to get up to go splash some water in my face, when I saw him sit down on the bench outside. Panic and dread hit me like a brick, and I sprinted into the closet to hide. I filled my mom in on everything, and she told me to run to the car, and she'd get between me and him and pepper spray him if needed. I did as she told me, and ran to the car, and as I passed him, he stood up and began walking toward the car. My mom yelled at him to get away from her car, and his reaction was to try to calmly start a conversation about this make and model of a car, while staring right at me. She ignored him, hopped in the car, locked us in, and started backing up as quickly as she could. I ducked down in my seat, but could still see him standing there, and I know he could see me because I watched as if he lifted his hand and waved me goodbye, before walking around to the back of the building and disappearing into the darkness. I felt sick, I couldn't sleep that night, and I never dared set foot anywhere near the back of that building again. So I guess that was a lesson learned. Creepy old smiley man, let's not meet again. This story happened in 2011 while I was at college as a student. I went to a university in rural Michigan. If you were off campus, you were basically in farmland. I worked at a tanning salon for the 4 years I attended school, which was pretty far off the beaten path. Morning and night shifts were worked alone, and afternoons were always with one other person. All of the employees were petite females ages 20 to 23 years old. One afternoon, I was working at the salon with a coworker, and a man who seemed to be in his early mid-30s came in. I immediately clocked this as weird because of 1, his age, and 2, his appearance. I would say about 90% of our clientele were female college students, and they were all either tan or at least trying to be. This guy was pretty pale, and overall just didn't fit the aesthetic. On top of all of that, something about this guy made all of the hairs on the back of my neck stand up, which confused me because he wasn't actually all that creepy looking. But something about him was so off. He was trying really hard to be calm and charming, but it came across as invasive, like he was interviewing me about my personal life. He never signed up for any sort of package, so I never got his name, and just chalked it up as to him being some awkward guy. The next morning, I was opening the salon solo. I remember it was a weekend morning because I felt like I was the only person awake in town. For context, the salon was a perfect square. The back and front door was connected by a long hallway, and on either side of the hallway were all the tanning beds. I'm not sure why, paranoia I guess, but I would always keep the doors locked until the first customer arrived when I was opening the salon. This particular morning, the same guy from just the day before sped into the parking lot and pulled his car up parallel to the front door of the salon, leaving his driver's side door wide open. He then walked up to the front door and tried to open it. The entire time I was standing in the middle of the hallway, so we were quite literally staring at each other. But when he pulled the door and realized it was locked, his facial expressions changed to defeat. Kind of slumped his head and then quickly turned around and walked back to the car and drove away. I thought this was so weird that I wrote down the make, model of the car, and license plate number, just in case something else happened. But I never saw him again after that. I started listening to true crime podcasts in 2020 and learned about Israel Keys. When I looked up his picture, I got full body chills. Staring back at me was that creepy tanning salon guy. Apparently his mother lived about 3 hours from my campus, where he was known to frequently visit her, and I was his perfect target. All the employees at the salon were a soft-spoken 21-year-old, 5'5", 120-pound female alone in an isolated area. I often think to myself, what other explanation could this guy possibly have for what he did that morning? As quickly as he realized the door was locked, he was out of there, and I know for a fact that he saw me as we didn't break eye contact and were only about 10 feet from one another. Usually a customer would do a little wave/talk through the door, or motion for me to unlock it while smiling. And then for him never to be seen again, I don't think there is any denying that had some nefarious intentions. But I'm so grateful that I was lucky enough to never have to find out. In December of 2015, I was making a north to south cross-country drive through the Midwestern United States. I was a university student at the time, a woman in my young 20s, driving home for the semester break. I was driving south through Kentucky on I-65 around 11:30 p.m., still about an hour away from the city where I was going to stop for the night. There was no other cars on the road at all, and I had not seen any for a while. That part of I-65 was a 6-lane divided highway, 3 lanes for each direction, in the area south of Mammoth Cave National Park and just northeast of Bowling Green, Kentucky. I was changing the music on my phone when I noticed an 18-wheeler coming up behind me in the rearview mirror. I stopped what I was doing, clicked off the phone, and waited for the truck to pass. The truck got right even with my car, and instead of completing the pass, matched my speed and stayed beside me. Then the driver turned on the spotlight on the side of his truck, which shone directly down into the cabin of my car and on my face. I was really confused, as I've never seen such a truck do anything like this before. The driver kept the light on my car for what seemed to be a very long time, and I was getting creeped out. I kept my gaze straight ahead. I slowed my speed so that the truck would finish passing me. The driver turned off the light and completed the pass, moved from the middle lane to the right lane in front of my car. I was very creeped out by this. I slowed down some more and changed to the leftmost lane to put some space between me and the big rig. As soon as I moved to the leftmost lane, the truck matched my speed again and moved over to the middle lane to come parallel to my car. The driver turned on a light again, shining it directly into the passenger side of my car cabin. I had now confirmed that this truck driver was definitely following me, and definitely being super creepy. I kept my gaze straight ahead, because I felt like looking over would somehow make it worse. The truck turned off the spotlight and pulled in front of my car in the leftmost lane. I decided to move away again, changing lanes behind the truck back over to the rightmost lane and speeding up. I was probably going right around the speed limit again, 70 to 75 miles per hour. By this time, I completed my merge. I saw the truck beginning to shift lanes towards me again, and speeding up to match me. Before they could pull up to next to me again, I decided it was time to get the hell out of there and floored it. I sped up to 90 miles per hour, the fastest I'd ever driven in my life, and I put maybe a mile of distance between me and the truck, before slowing down some. I looked up to the rear view mirror, and I will never forget the image. This big orange tractor trailer illuminated by the street lamps of a highway interchange, absolutely devouring the distance I had put between us. The truck was charging up behind me at an unbelievable speed. I sped up again, but it did not matter. The truck caught up to me, pulled beside me, and turned on the spotlight again. I stared straight ahead, keeping my speed, not daring to look over. It was at this time that I decided my only advantage was that maneuverability of my small car. I hit my brakes and dropped back behind the 18-wheeler, moving into the middle lane behind their truck. They moved over to the right lane, and I moved over behind them. I decided to stay right behind the truck in its blind spot, so that they could not see me. I saw a sign for an exit and decided this is how I would escape. I waited behind the truck in its blind spot until we came up on the exit. I waited until the last possible moment. Once the truck body was beyond the point where the exit split away, I darted out from behind the truck into the exit. Thoroughly shaken, I wondered how far away from the interstate I should go and if the truck would come looking for me. I ended up just pulling into a Wendy's right by the interstate. I parked and I got out. I inspected my vehicle, looking to see if there was any damage, thinking maybe the driver was trying to warn me or something wrong with my car. There was nothing wrong with it. I waited at the Wendy's for a little while to make sure the truck was long gone before getting back on the interstate and continuing to my hotel. After the break, when I drove back to school, I did not use I-65. Hey everyone, I hope you all enjoyed those stories, and if you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe. It means a lot. And as always, stay depraved.